This is Eric Bepke for Dead Man Video. This is a video response to a piece by Coconut Island, aka Vaush, about how free speech absolutists need to address the problem of bad speech. I am not going to talk about principle versus expedient. I am not going to talk about copyright law. I am not going to talk about defamation. I am not going to talk about pornography. I am not going to talk about the long history of U.S. political imprisonment. Vaush says he gets that, and you can find plenty of other stuff on my channel anyway. This is very much them or us. I call them R-types. Perhaps you can remember reprehensible, reactionary, racist, right-wingers. I'm using funny words because I don't want to get into issues of policy. While they are, of course, extremely important, it's much more important to talk about how people think and communicate. Besides, there have been R-types on the left and non-R-types on the right. And by us, I mean you. So inoculate yourself and others. Inoculating yourself is much more painful, so do it first, and then you can try your hand at the rest of the community. I already offered a dose here. It's a book. In dire circumstances, it can actually be read. But since we're both here, perhaps you prefer a video. Search for George Lakoff Moral Politics and watch the video. Now, did that work? Well, I've recommended the Lakoff video scores of times, and you can count the responses on the stump of an amputee. So I'm going to get a bit saucier about this. You like facts, and you like scholarship, not to mention scholarships, and you like science. You like modern thought, unless you prefer modern thought, or 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 even modern thought. Now, all this modern thought has given us some very nice things, but it is not without its downside. For one thing, it misses about 98% of what goes on in the human brain. R-types generally prefer an older way of thinking, which may not be as good at solving certain problems, certainly does a bang-up job on others. You may have paid someone a lot of money to learn to think in a modern way. R-types go to a different kind of school where they learn marketing, which can really sell anything. Now I live in a postmodern world, and postmodernists have come up with some ideas that at least acknowledge the old ways of thinking. I can recommend two excellent postmodern journals, but don't worry, you won't get any Frenchness on you. One is Mad Magazine, and the other is The Onion. Remember what I said about how painful it is to take your own medicine? Well, continue the slogan of The Onion, Tu stultus es, you are dumb. You even admit that you're dumb, too dumb, in fact, to figure out that nobody who can communicate feels the need to use message as a verb. Framing, on the other hand, is incredibly important. Since this is a response, I might as well pick on Vaush some more. This video is pretty good, but the title is a mess. First of all, I know it's great fun to call people names, but it may not be effective. Second of all, it's not conservatism. You are almost certainly more conservative than R-types. For one thing, you probably believe in a lot more of the Constitution than just the Second Amendment. And third, it's not irrational. It's irrationalist, and there's a difference. So back in 1630 or so, a guy named Descartes was very impressed with his ability to reason from first principles. He came up with a lot of ideas which have come to be called rationalism and are the basis of modern thought. Unfortunately, about paying attention to reality, not so much. He had some funny ideas about the brain, specifically that everybody had the same reasoning ability, so all you'd have to do is present them the right facts and they'd come to the right conclusion. This was historically important because it means we don't have to be ruled by a king, but we can govern ourselves through the rule of law, which hasn't always worked out as advertised. Since then, Some very good science has shown that Descartes got pretty much everything wrong, but there still are people who haven't gotten the memo yet. Now, many say the election was stolen, and I quite agree. In fact, I seriously consider the radical notion that it was so Sandra Day O'Connor could retire under a Republican. But why was the election so close when Gore obviously had all the right facts? Well, I've answered my own question. Little wooden-head Gore thought the facts would carry him through, whereas Bush put on his practiced galladang, which was better communication. Well, if you can't come up with perfect phrasing, at least you can avoid the words that your opponents use. Right? Right? Maybe not. Every time I search for global warming on YouTube, the robot helpfully puts up something about climate change from the United Nations, no less. Most people probably don't even notice. But Frank Luntz notices these things. He's so R-type he doesn't believe there should be any sort of a social safety net. Back in the 90s, when evidence for global warming was becoming unignorable, he realized that they couldn't win on science, but they had to win on words. He says he does more focus groups than anybody, and he discovered that when he used the term climate change, the people were least likely to want to do anything about it. So, for political reasons, he persuaded the Bush administration to say climate change, and it worked. Now, maybe you want to say to me, come on, that's just semantics. You know what he was trying to say. But if that's your approach, then you're not part of the solution, you're part of the precipitate. Of course I knew what he was trying to say, but what you're trying to say doesn't matter as much as what other people hear. You're going to have to convince people who aren't nearly as nice as I am. Besides, it's not semantics, it's pragmatics, and pragmatics trumps semantics every time. But if you got that down, you got that down, and maybe you're ready to inoculate the community. Well, you have a perfect platform right here, and if I can produce this from a homeless shelter, you can certainly do better. At least I have some live background music from Free. But I warn you, it's going to be an uphill battle. See this interview between George Lakoff and Tavis Smiley, obviously before Smiley stumbled on his own human weenus. Smiley does everything he can not to listen, but to be fair, Lakoff does everything he can not to communicate effectively. I wish I knew how to fix this, but I don't. All I know is not to do the things that haven't worked again. So the next time somebody tells you abortion is murder and must be banned, don't go all feminist on them or point out, perhaps accurately, that they don't really care. Instead, point out that bans don't really solve the problem and may make it worse. The next time someone says all or blue or even white lives matter, don't advertise that you're not a racist. Instead, remind them of Kent State and the Freedom Riders. The next time someone says we need more cops to fight crime, don't drink the Kool-Aid and argue on their terms. Instead, point out we live in a culture where every problem can be solved on the TV in an hour with violence, and a lot of other countries do a much better job than we do. It is possible to be rational and persuasive, and if it doesn't work, you can always go back to shouting. And that's all I have to say.